And so I'm going to talk today about PowerShell authoring in SCOM. It's kind of interesting to me that I still find people that try to write monitors in SCOM and they put in PowerShell scripts using our built-in, execute a script, run a script type monitors, rules, the wizards that are in the console. And then they'll ask a question internally, why isn't this working, right? And so we're going to cover some of that today. So we do support scripts, right? Right out of the box in the console, you can go create rules, monitors, recoveries, and tasks. And there's a scripting object for each one. The problem is when, a lot of people see this screen and they just paste in their PowerShell script, and then they start getting these weird errors from cscript.exe or you can't understand a parameter, and that's because this type, the modules that are built into SCOM, still only support VB script. It's bizarre to me that we never added PowerShell natively to the console. I'm still sometimes shocked by that to this day. But I think the reason that we didn't is because there are so many good solutions to this problem already out there that so many people have been using for years and have invested in. And the first one being the community pack from Cookdown. So I can't remember who the original author of this was, but Cookdown kind of took over and implemented this, PowerShell authoring into their one of something they offer on their website. And as I've been working with a multitude of new customers lately, I've noticed that I'm seeing this management pack everywhere. So it's immensely popular. And it's quite easy because it lets you implement PowerShell rules, monitors, tasks, and recoveries right from the SCOM console, which is where, unless you're an advanced MP author, that's the reality is that's where most people do their management pack authoring. So the other two, the more advanced options, are using Visual Studio with VSAE and then optionally fragments, or Silect MP Author, again optionally with fragments. And so I'm going to do demos of all three of these today, so you can kind of compare and contrast the differences. So the first one is, Cookdown's PowerShell authoring pack. It's a free management pack. You do have to just go to their website and register, and they'll send you a download link. It's been in widespread use for many, many years. I think the last time it was updated was 2021. So it's not something that, there's a lot of new development on or anything, but it really covers the majority of the bases that most customer scenarios need. So the benefit is it's an in-console experience if that's where you do your authoring today, and it uses very familiar wizards. In fact, it uses these same wizards for VB script authoring. It just changes the modules behind the scenes. So they didn't have to do a lot of UI development in this management pack. So when you bring the Cookdown management pack in, these are the new things that you're going to see. You're going to see things like this PowerShell based option in a lot of different areas. And so you can see in alert generating rules, there's PowerShell based, collection rules, PowerShell based. And you'll see this kind of community tag in a lot of these. And that lets you know that's where the source of those comes from. But this gives you the majority of scenarios that you would need. Monitors is probably the top thing that I see customers needing. Is they need to be able to write a monitor that runs a PowerShell script that outputs good or bad, right, to drive that monitor state. Agent tasks are pretty common. Recoveries on your monitors, also very common to use in PowerShell. VB script is definitely a dying scripting language, and There will come a day when C-script is no longer going to be provided in the Windows operating system, and so PowerShell for a long time has really, probably since 2012, has been the default scripting language in SCOM. We just didn't offer a really good UI solution to it, and that's where this Cookdown pack comes in. So let's do a demo of what that looks like. So here's a SCOM 2025 environment. And I'm just going to go to my installed management packs. And I'm going to import it. Let's see. I think I put it. Maybe I didn't. So let's go to our management packs from the community and Cookdown PowerShell. And we'll just import this. Fairly quick and easy, very basic. Immediately when I go into write new monitors, I'll see these options. Don't know. Unit monitor. There we go. And so if I'll come in here and I'll look at scripting, immediately I'll see I have this new PowerShell based option. And I can do a 3-state or a 2-state monitor. So for the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to do a 2-state monitor. Now let's talk about the script that I'm going to use. I've done some demos with this kind of stuff before, but I'm going to use about the most basic PowerShell script that does something that's still somewhat realistic, right? So I'm going to count the number of log files in a folder. And I'll assume that, my application needs to clean up those log files on its own. And when it's not cleaning them up and the log files start to build up in that folder, that's a problem, right? And I want to detect that problem. So a script is one of the easiest ways to solve that issue. And PowerShell can do it in 4 lines, probably less if you combine them. But so I'm going to set an arbitrary threshold in my script. I'm going to set a location of where the log files exist. I'm going to get those files as objects, and there they are. And then the last thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to count them, right? And so if I look at my file count, I have 5 files. And so we're going to use this script as our example. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. And let's choose our PowerShell 2-state monitor. We're going to create a new management pack called Demo Cookdown, because I'm using the Cookdown modules to do it. And let's do this Demo Cookdown monitor. And I'll just choose my favorite generic target of choice, which is the Windows Server operating system as my target. And forgot, I'm going to uncheck monitors enabled. I'm going to specifically enable this for one system with an override. I want to run this every 1 minute just for the purposes of testing and demos. And then here we go. So I'm going to call this count files in folder for my script. And the Cookdown automatically gives us an example of a working PowerShell script, right? So you could use this. This doesn't count files in a folder. So we need to customize this based on what our needs are. So I can pull this out and go customize it in my, VS Code or ISE or whatever you like to use to edit your PowerShell scripts, or I can do it right here in the UI. So it does take a parameter for arguments, and it's just a single parameter. So if you're used to PowerShell scripts where you would have multiple parameters being passed in the script, this UI, because it borrowed from VBScript, it only accepts a single input parameter to the script. And so what you have to do is, if you want to use parameters, you have to put them all in just a string, and you can separate them by something like a semicolon or a space or a comma. And then you can use a split function inside PowerShell to break that out into multiple parameters to use. But for the purpose of this demo, we're going to keep it really, really simple. We're not going to use it at all. They load the SCOM API, they load the property bags. I'll talk about this more in a minute. And then they've got this example of some extra stuff. So I'm going to take all that out and I'm just going to paste in our 4 lines that I copied before. And then I'm going to adjust the rest of this to work with the output, which is file count, right? And so I'm going to say if file count is greater, and what did I call my threshold? File count threshold. That makes sense. File count threshold. Then do something, right? So I'm going to say this is bad, right? If the file count is more than what my threshold is, that's bad. Else, state is going to be good. You can set these to whatever you want. They're just arbitrary values, and you'll see where this kind of plays in the monitor type configuration on the next screen. So that's it. I'm just either going to output good or bad, and then I'm going to output my property bags through the script. All of that stuff was built in. I only had to really add 4 lines and then make some customizations here. And I didn't have to do a lot of those customizations other than my expression, right? Because that is part of your script. So that's it. I'm going to go next. And then this is, how do I describe what's unhealthy in the monitor? How do I describe what's healthy in the monitor? So unhealthy state equals bad, we said. And for the healthy expression, state equals good. And then do I want it to be, critical or a warning state? And then configure alerts. Yep, I do want alerts. And so I'm going to say demo cookdown monitor too many log files. And then I'll just say too many log files found for the alert. And we'll just do a warning here to match our monitor state and create. So that's it. I can, replicate that same thing. Maybe I want to collect the number of files in the folder as a perf counter, right? I can do that. I would just go to rules and say, hey, let's create a new rule. It's going to be a collection rule, but PowerShell based. And there's a script event performance script performance collection rule. So this automatically includes the mappers and all the different things that you would normally have to go custom build yourself. The only thing you have to do is tweak the script a little bit and change the property bag output. So with that, I am going to go into my log files. So here's my log. Oh, I forgot one important thing. I did set this to disabled, so we need to override this for a specific object. And on my SQL server, I'm going to say enabled equal true. And the rest of this I like. So we'll just say OK. That will turn that on for my SQL server. And then the other thing that I need to do is, there's 5 logs in this folder. That is not over my threshold. So I'm just going to add an additional log file. So I'm just going to copy this here and let's just rename it to log 6. All right. And so if I come into my demo here, I can see that I'm going to create a new state view. And let's just call this Windows Server OS. Since that's what I used as my target, I'm just going to go ahead and create a state view for that so I can see them all very easily. Oh, that is so weird. Unknown alias. I just did this earlier. That is hilarious. Okay, so I'm not really sure. I think I probably need to close my console and reopen it, because I've been using the same name for these management packs multiple times. Let's try this one more time. state view, Windows Server OS, and oops, shoot. And there we go. Yep, that did it. And so I'm going to open Health Explorer for this guy. And yep, he's already turned yellow. If I look at the context for the state change event, I can see that property equals bad. That's the only reason this is all I have is because that's all I output in the property bag. If I wanted to see like the number of actual files, I would just need to add that to my property bags that get output to the monitor. And once I do that, that would also make that available to be put in the alert itself. But we can see that the OS is now unhealthy. If I go to my active alerts, I'll see here's my too many log files found. The alert was generated. So very easy, very quick. That's as basic as it can be. We can enhance from there. So there's really only 4 core requirements if we're going to script something for a monitor in PowerShell, right? We have to load the mom script API, which you see here. We have to load the property bag module. That's just another function within SCOM within PowerShell for SCOM. And then we need to put something into a property bag, right? So we just created a new property bag called state, and we called it bad. We can make that whatever we want. And then the last thing we do is we output those property bags within the script. So the Cookdown module, it already has all of this built into it, right? So we didn't have to do this other than we had to customize what we want to put in for the property bag. So what I want to kind of compare and contrast now is what does this process look like in Visual Studio with VSAE, and then later the same thing with Silect, right? So Visual Studio is actually easy to use, but it is much more complex, and you'll see that it's not just this UI wizard driven thing, but it actually is faster if you're going to use fragments, and you have to do this a lot. It's faster than going through the UI, and it's way more powerful. You have a lot more options with the Visual Studio built management pack. And especially, the UI in SCOM, it doesn't understand fragments. It doesn't have the ability to consume them and bring them in easily. Whereas Visual Studio does, and I've published a ton of examples of rules, monitors, recoveries, tasks, and now above and beyond what you can do in the Cookdown management pack, we can add discoveries and groups and leverage PowerShell and fragments with those. So here's an example of and this is just an excerpt of the fragments that I've published, and these are available inside Silect MP Author, or you can download them separately and use them with Visual Studio. But this is an example of just the PowerShell ones, right? So there's actually twice this many fragments, but these are the ones that focus on PowerShell. So if we look at monitors, like I've got one to monitor a file age, file count, file size, folders changed, last write time, a port check, and then I have these generic ones with no params and a generic one with params. And we're going to use the no params one in this example. So with that, I will kick in. And so I'm going to go to my Windows 11 box that's got Visual Studio. And we're going to create a new project. And we're going to do just a SCOM 2022 management pack. We're going to call this demo Visual Studio. And I think the rest of that works. So if you're used to Visual Studio, this isn't going to blow anyone's mind. If you're not used to Visual Studio, that's okay. You don't have to know how it works or have a lot of experience with it, because these fragments make it so easy to use. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into my solution. I'm going to right click and say add an existing item. And I'm going to choose from all these different fragments that I've published. And I'm going to go find monitor time script PowerShell no parameters. And I'm going to bring that in. So there it is. It's added that to my solution. And when I click it, it'll show me a description. So these fragments have a lot of notes in them to kind of help you understand what do I need to change? What do I need to do to be able to use this? So this is a monitor which runs a PowerShell script, and then it outputs a property bag as good or bad to drive monitor state. Just like the other one, you need to fill in the PowerShell that, does something that does what you want to do. So with this, the only thing we have to do is we have to find and replace these 4 items. So I'm going to start with company ID, and I'm going to replace that with demo, and my app name. We're going to replace that one with Visual Studio for the example. The class ID, that's a little more complicated because you kind of have to know some references. But once you use this tool, it actually gets a lot easier. So in this case, I'm going to choose, I thought I would be in my cache, the Windows alias. I'm going to use the Windows library. I'm going to use the Microsoft.windows.server.operating system. Operating system, no misspells. All right. And replace that. That's going to be my generic target of choice. And then for the unique ID, this is just something that makes it unique. So I'm just going to call this kind of what it is. Count files in folder, and let's replace all of those. So that's it. So I could literally save it and build it, and this is a working management pack with a PowerShell based monitor. If you want to see, behind the scenes what all it did, you can see there's a data source module for counting files in a folder. It's got the script that we need to probably modify. There is a monitor type for this monitor, and there is a monitor as well. Again, you don't need to understand all of that XML to be able to use this. The only thing we really need to do is we need to edit the script the same way we did previously. So I'm going to go back and grab the text of that script and copy it. And this has a lot of stuff, like I could say, count files in folder. And it's got logging. There's a lot of stuff that's automatically built in that you don't have to write here, or just use as an example. And so this one just sets something to bad. We don't want that. We want to actually put our code in it. So we're going to add the file count threshold, the folder path, all of that good stuff. And then I want to say if the condition, which is going to be the file count is greater than our threshold, this is bad. So I'm just going to change this to bad condition. I could change it to bad and good, just like I did the previous ones, but this monitor type just uses these by default. Again, you could customize this as much as you want, but let's just keep it simple. So if the file count is greater than the threshold, that's bad. Else, I'm going to get rid of this logging line to keep it simple. Else, it's a good condition. And then we're going to return all of our bags. So that's it. So the only other changes I really need to make in this management pack is, and I could do this in the console if you wanted to, if you don't like looking at XML, but in the monitor, I'm going to say enabled equals false. So it's not enabled by default. And the default is running once an hour. I'm going to change this to every 60 seconds to match our other one. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to build it. And it succeeded. So that's it. We're done. We've created the management pack. So with this, I'm just going to kick back over into SCOM. I'm going to go into administration and let's import it. So add from disk, and I save this on my Windows 11 system. Bin debug. Let's look at that timestamp. Yep, that looks very recent. So let's bring that in. Hopefully it imports. And there we go. We've imported it. So now we can go take a look at it in our console. So I'm going to go to authoring, look at our monitors. And I did, oh, no, there it is. I just needed a quick refresh. So there's our Visual Studio count files and folder monitor. So I just need to do a quick override for my SQL server, and we're going to set enabled to true. That's it. And so now when I go look at like Health Explorer again, so if I go look at my Windows Server OS and I open Health Explorer, I'll immediately be able to see that that monitor exists right here. And it's got a white circle. We're just waiting for this to initialize. And once it initializes, it will then run the script and determine whether state is good or bad based on the count. It'll be bad, and it will generate another alert. So we'll come back to this. We're going to go do the Silect one, and by the time we come back, this one should be good to go. So how does Silect MP Author improve upon this experience? So when I came out with the fragment idea and started writing them and publishing them, they only worked in Visual Studio, and Silect changed MP Author to support. They really embraced the fragment ecosystem, and their tools just make it a whole lot easier to bring these in. You still have to do some editing. You still have to change some things manually, but you'll see it's a more visual experience by far. So we're going to do a demo with the Silect. All right. And while I'm here, I'm just going to quick check Health Explorer. Nope, still just the one. So that one has not initialized yet. So we'll come back to that. All right. So I'm going to close out my Visual Studio and I'm going to open up MP Author. And we're going to create a new management pack. We're going to call this demo.silect. And I think that one, oh, that does not exist. Okay. Whoops. So let's browse that and make a new folder, demo.silect. Whoops. There we go. Select that. And we'll just do a SCOM 2022 management pack, empty, and create. So this is just an empty management pack. It's just a piece of XML. There's nothing in it. So the first thing I'm going to do is just hit import fragment. I'll browse and try to find the fragment that I want. So we're doing a monitor, a real simple monitor that uses PowerShell with no parameters being passed to the script. And instead of doing find and replace, it's just a UI here. So I'll just call this demo. I'll actually call this Silect. We're going to target our Windows Server operating system. They have a nice browser in here that will let me see all of the different ones, so I don't have to know that big string. I can find it. And then for this, we'll call this count files in folder like we did the other one. And what you'll see is as I'm typing these, it's doing the find and replace for me. So that's it. We are literally done. I can hit import, and that's a working management pack. Now, we still need to go edit the script the same way we did in the other one. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go find my module type here. So that is my data source. The data source contains the script. And I'm just going to choose view and edit XML. And here's my script. So I can do the same kind of things I did before, count files in folder. And I need to go grab my ISE script. There it is. And we're going to do the same script changes that we did before. We're going to say this there we go. There's our 4 lines that we want added to the script. And then I'm going to say if file count is greater than my threshold, file count threshold, we'll delete this, delete these logs. And we're going to say this one is the bad condition. So I'm just going to flip these around. And the result is the good condition. And that is it. So I'm going to say OK. And again, I'm going to go edit this monitor. There's a couple things I forgot to do. And so let me see if I can do this in properties. I don't think I can. Yeah, I probably can. I just do the XML edit, but I'm going to say enabled equal false and run every 60 seconds like we did the other one. So we'll say OK and we'll save it. And this one's ready to go. So I'm going to kick back over here and I'm going to go to my administration, installed management packs. We're going to import the Silect one this time. So I saved that in my management packs repository. And there it is. Let's install it. And again, just like before, I'm going to go to authoring. I'm going to do a quick refresh. And there is my Silect count files monitor. I'm going to override this for a specific server, SQL, enabled equal true. And now the agent will download the managed pack and it will start applying that just like the other one did. So let's just kick over. Let's open Health Explorer. And now our Visual Studio one should be working. It is. It's turned unhealthy and it's output the bad condition. And active alerts. There we go. We have our alert. And so within probably 2 to 3 minutes, we'll see our alert from Silect. So, again, Silect and Visual Studio, they work very similarly. Silect just makes it a lot easier to bring them in. It has some better checking that you can validate that your management pack work. You can deploy straight from the Silect tool into your management group. There's a lot of benefits to authoring, especially if you're going to create, like if you get into something where you're creating a lot of these. There were several demos earlier today where, like in the ServiceNow demo, where every time they have a new support group request, they just go in, they've got their fragment, they just implement it, and it's done. That's a really, really fast way to do it. And that's where, that tool makes it a little bit easier. So we still don't have it. We'll come back to that and check on it when we get into like Q&A. So let's talk about PowerShell best practices, right? This was very high level. It was 4 lines of code, right? For the scenario that's most common that I see for SCOM administrators is, one of your customers come to you and say, hey, can you monitor this application? We already have a script that does it. And they give you the PowerShell script, right? All you have to do is SCOMify the script, which means you have to just add those 4 things that are required, right? You have to load the mom script API. You have to load the property bag module. You have to put the output of the script they gave you, into property bags, and then you release those property bags to SCOM. But that was 4 lines of code. That's very, very simple. The problem with that example is, you have to think about what about Cookdown? And by Cookdown, I don't mean the company. I mean, when you're authoring scripts, you have to be a little more careful because if you target something that has multiple instances, you have to actually author it a little bit differently. So you want to think about, am I targeting something simple like an operating system? Or am I targeting something more complex like databases or logical disks or something where there's multiple of them? You really need to take that into consideration. And I have two really good articles on Cookdown authoring. Um, the other thing is I've got a demo script template that really helps with PowerShell. So I'll show that off here if you're not familiar with it. But well, I use this constantly, and ever since I published it in 2017. So that's been, oh man, that's been a long time. I see this all the time now. Like I get customer management packs where we're troubleshooting something, and I'll see this template, so I know it's making a difference. The benefit of this PowerShell template is it kind of pre-populates the most common things you're going to do in a SCOM script, and all you have to do is delete the parts you don't want. So I give examples of like multiple different parameters, whether they're strings or integers, or they're the discovery script parameters that have to go in. I'll give examples of like a testing section when you're running it outside of SCOM and you're building your script and testing it. I'll have some constants where we like name our script and the event ID we want to use for logging. I'll add things like the start time, who's running the script, so you know what context. Is it local system? Is it a run as account? We load the mom script API. We showed that. And then I always like to do this script is starting. I know Mike Sargent called that out. Like that's, I may comment out a lot of these logs because maybe I don't want my logs filling up every time a script runs. But while I'm troubleshooting or when I'm first implementing a management pack, I want as much logging as possible.
Here, here.
Yeah. And so discovery data, if it's a discovery script, this is me loading that module. If it's not a discovery script, you just delete it, right? It's much faster to delete code than writing code. And so, if it's a property bag script and, if it's a script that runs on a management server and I need to connect to the management server SDK, I've got a section for that. And then, here's your main script section. This is where you put your stuff into the script. And then if it's a discovery script, I'm adding discovery data, which is different than property bags. It's similar, but it's different. And then if it's a property bag script, which is for monitoring or performance collection type rules, this is the property bag script. And then I always end the script and I always calculate how long did this script take to run on the agent. And I log that because that's really important to understand if you've written something that's taking a long time to run, right? And so this is a good resource for you as far as script examples go. The other thing is you want to output a lot of property bags. The number of property bags you output just enhance the monitoring context. So in my example today, I did bad or good, and that's it, right? But another one would be maybe output the threshold that was set, maybe output the number of files that we found, right? And then once you output those into property bags, you can use them you can see them in the state change event, and you can also use them in your alerts. Write lots of logging. I mentioned that. And think about error handling. I cannot tell you how many times I get some customer managed pack and they're having a problem with a script and there's no error handling. So, they're just assuming when I do a get child item in PowerShell that it got something, right? So you should always check to see, did I get an error? Did I get a null value? And handle that within your script. So those are good things to think about. And here's some resources for PowerShell authoring, the links. And so this deck will be published, obviously. How to go get the Cookdown management packs, authoring, examples of what I did today with Visual Studio, examples with Silect, and then a link to that demo SCOM script template as well. And just really quick to prove that it worked, here's my Silect alert, just like my Visual Studio, just like my Cookdown. So the exact same monitoring, 3 different ways to accomplish it. Personally, I use fragments for like everything because most of the time I get into some much more complex scenarios, and that's where the built-in UI just doesn't do it for me. But it's still a great tool, great option if you're not aware of it, or if um, if you're kind of nervous about writing scripting-based monitors, it's the best place to start for sure. And with that, we'll take Q&A.
Surprisingly, Kevin, there's almost no questions out there.
Okay.
There's been a number of people who've said very nice things, but I'm not sure that there's much. Somebody wanted a proc dump of that exception you got.
Oh, that's Brooke. You could ignore
Stoyan mentioned that he'd had the same sort of behavior. I think that was the crash. Flip had to leave, and everybody said, "No, thank you."
Oh, wow.
That
so we
is
normally
literally
get a lot.
it. That's unbelievable because usually you have the most questions and they just go on and on and on. It's wonderful. You must be getting really good at this. So lots of questions coming now.
So there we go. Good. Any thoughts on running many PowerShell scripts on boxes like 1,000 monitors? I will tell you this, and one of the reasons I put that timer of, how long did this script take to run? Unless you're accessing something in WMI that takes a long time to respond, or you're doing some very complex calculations, or you're loading a massive array and using a lot of memory, what I have found is most of these PowerShell scripts, they run in milliseconds. The power and again, when you run PowerShell in SCOM, it is not calling PowerShell.exe. It is running under a special PowerShell module in the monitoring host.exe process, and it is incredibly efficient. And so I was very afraid of overloading agents with PowerShell in the early days. And I'm still careful, right? Because you still could write bad PowerShell or PowerShell that is very resource intensive, especially if you're reaching out to your remote resources like querying SQL, querying AD. But for the most part, I found it to be incredibly efficient and not that big of a deal. So, been using those fragments, man. I love to hear when people are using fragments. VMware solutions, yeah. Release date for 2025, that's already been released. So, oh yeah, you've already got it. Yep. And agents placed in maintenance mode, ad hoc schedule. I don't know when it will start. Could I use PowerShell to cancel the maintenance mode from the agent? The machine starts up. Oh, that's Ben. Hey, Ben. Gosh, I haven't seen you in a long time. I don't know. I think I'd need more information about how it's being triggered. Like when you say ad hoc schedule, there's no way to block maintenance mode from happening from the agent. But depending on what's triggering it, you could block that trigger. So that's kind of a tough one. What instance runs the script in the case of Cookdown? And also develop your monitor. What instance runs the script in the case of the Cookdown MP? So all 3 of those examples, if I understand what you mean, is Windows Server Operating System was the targeted instance, and the same modules are being used. So it's like a TimeScript PowerShell module. It's a little bit different because in my VSAE and Silect fragments, I separate out the data source from the monitor type from the monitor. Whereas if you use the Cookdown one, they already have the library contains the monitor type. So you're just creating a monitor and you're passing the script to that monitor type. And so it's a little bit different, but at the end of the day, it's exact same modules. And any tips for doing the same thing to Linux? So I have actual fragments for Linux. Now, obviously, PowerShell doesn't run natively on Linux, so you'll typically run either Bash script or shell script of some kind on the Linux agent. But the output of that, the standard output, gets submitted to the management server through the WSMan connection, and then PowerShell receives it and can interpret that. So some of my fragments, like I have a fragment for Linux that does a cat on a file, and it takes that entire file, parses it out in PowerShell. So you could absolutely build PowerShell based fragments. They're just going to run on the management server to interpret the output from the Linux agent, which is a little bit different. Well, that caught us up. How to make a performance rule for SQL counters is don't want to define a rule for each instance to pick up all instances on a server. Yeah, you want to define a rule for each. So if you target the generic object called SQL DB Engine, that's going to run on all instances on the box. And so you don't have to target each instance. The problem I think you're running into is like if you've got two named instances on a box and you target the named instance perf counter, it's only going to leverage that named instance perf counter. And so it's only going to run for that instance from perfmon. There is a method when you're authoring it to pass in a variable, which is a discovered property from the DB Engine class called instance name. And that way it's dynamic. I have an example. I have an example of, it's been a long time since I've looked at it. Multi-instance. I think this is, yep. So here's a blog post that has the exact information you're looking for. And there's this option. Now this uses, let me see, I think this is using a really old tool to do it with, but essentially you could write it your way and then change it in the XML at the end of the day. But this is where I will go to the database engine and use a target host property of, now this one is databases, but which would be like the database name. You could use the SQL DB engine and pass in the instance name. And it would work exactly the same way. In fact, if you look at any of our performance collection rules in the SQL Manage Pack, you'll see that's how we do it. And so you could copy and paste directly from those. More info on maintenance mode. Azure VM is turned off to save money. The trigger into maintenance mode was the shutdown for like 3 months, but we don't know when it might start up again. It could be next week of 2 months. Looking at the start of the VM just starting the VM ends maintenance mode. Let's see if it starts up, it's still in maintenance mode. Man, I'd have to think about that. There's probably a way. I mean, I can think of some hard ways, some really hard ways. One of them being there is a way to write a workflow that won't go into maintenance mode. And you could collect that event, like do an event collection with that workflow. But no, event collection wouldn't work because it won't pass through the queues. Honestly, I would probably write something that queries VMware to see like an agent startup and through an API and use that to cancel maintenance mode in SCOM. I would do it all on the management server, not from the agent itself. From the agent itself is going to be a tough order because once it's in maintenance mode, we don't really send that much up. So yeah, that's difficult. Yeah, unhosted class with management. So the only problem with that, Tom, is the unhosted class, and that's my example that I've written. We won't send that data until maintenance mode is over. So it will run on the agent and it will execute. And if it generates an alert or collects an event, it will sit in the queue, but it won't actually go to the management server from my testing. So yeah, that's kind of a deep, complex question. So Tom, it's not affected by maintenance mode, but the problem is when the whole agent is in maintenance mode, the stuff sits in the queue. It doesn't actually get sent to the management server. So if I wrote an unhosted class and I'm collecting perf data, I'm looking for collected events, and I'm doing alerts, all of those workflows are running. They're not in maintenance mode, but they sit, those alerts, that performance data, those events sit in the queue on the agent until maintenance mode is over, and then it sends them up. And so that's why I feel like that solution. Now it has been, I probably wrote that article 10 years ago, unhosted. So I haven't tested this in forever, but, yeah, 2014, 10 years ago. Wow. I'm getting old. So that was one of the challenges. And I wrote about that in this article, the example. Yeah, we will not transfer this data until maintenance mode is ended. So I think that's it.
There's one there from Alexi. Can Cookdown work for discovery workflows, or is it for monitors rules only?
Yeah, they don't have discovery modules. And the reason is the UI really doesn't have the ability to create classes. And so they never wrote, you can't create just a blank object discovery in SCOM, right? So, you can come in here and you can see your object discoveries, but there's no option to create one. Creating discoveries and creating classes is beyond the capability of the UI. And if you need to create classes, we need to get you into Visual Studio or Silect.
The thing about Cookdown, I think he's asking, I'm not entirely sure. For Cookdown to work, you actually have to invoke the same probe action module with the same parameters. That's when Cookdown actually works. The parameters for a discovery would be different every time because you got a computer name that's different.
I was thinking
it's not even applicable.
Yeah, I was thinking Cookdown's PowerShell pack is what we were talking about. Okay, so does Cookdown work for discovery, or is it monitors and rules only? It should work for discovery the same way. If you break it on a multi-instance object, but I can't think of. It would be weird, to be honest, to run a discovery on a multi-instance object. I can't think of a time that I've ever done that. Well, I take that back. The one example is discovering databases for a DB engine. I think we target the DB engine and then we discover the databases on that DB engine. And technically, a DB engine could be a multi-instance object, but honestly, if I've only got a handful of items, I wouldn't even care about Cookdown. I would just let it run multiple times for each instance. It's only when I've got a lot of them.
Yeah, especially since the discovery is probably only running once a day anyways.
Right.
It's not going to make a significant difference.
Right. Yeah, there is a certain amount of effort I'm willing to go through to do something the right way, but unless it pays dividends or creates a problem, I'm probably going to do it the easy way.
Yeah. That earlier question about thousands of monitors depends on the frequency. If you're running thousands of monitors every 5 seconds, yeah, it's going to be a huge load. But if the monitors are only running once an hour, thousands is not even going to be noticeable.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything else there. Other than a lot of really nice things being said about it.
Yes, indeed. Nothing else that I see either. So, well, Kevin, thank you so much once again for participating at MP University today. That's fantastic. I will be, as soon as we get the slides and the recording and everything, we'll get that sent out to everyone. Everyone who's left, please do respond to that survey. That's going to get sent out at the close of the event. And thank you once again to Microsoft, the product team, Kevin. Thank you to David for presenting. Thank you to Stoyan. Thank you to Bob. Thank you to Mike, of course, for the sessions. And thank you to everyone who's stuck with us through these 5 hours. We hope you take away a bunch of knowledge and things that you can take into your own environment to help help make working with SCOM that much easier. So once again, thank you everyone. Appreciate your attendance today, and we will be in contact with everyone shortly with the resources from today.
Thanks everyone.